I'm honored to have the opportunity to speak with Minnesota's first African-American Supreme Court Justice, the 1971 MVP for the National Football League and Pro Football Hall of Famer, Alan Page. Like many Walden students, Justice Page earned a graduate degree while working so that he could pursue his dreams of effecting positive social change. For him, that meant earning a law degree while at the height of his professional football career. He then worked in the Minnesota Attorney General's office before being elected to the Minnesota Supreme Court in 1992. He was reelected to the court 3 times and served until he reached mandatory retirement age in 2015. As an ardent defender of equal education for children, he is now focused on the Page Education Foundation he founded with his wife to assist students of color with post-secondary education. To date, their foundation has awarded over $14 million in grants to more than 6,700 individuals. Justice Page, you're with us today in Minneapolis as our keynote speaker for our summer commencement. As you know, our students are working professionals, many of whom are balancing careers with family and school and other obligations, and that's no small feat. And this takes a lot of passion, determination, and drive, which you've displayed in your life as well. What motivated you to pursue a law degree while you were leading a successful football career?
Well, my interest in the law began long before my interest in football. From the time I was 7, 8, 9 years old, when people would ask, what do you want to do when you grow up? I would say I wanted to be a lawyer. Probably as a result of not knowing any lawyers, but hearing stories about how lawyers made lots of money, didn't work too hard, drove big fancy cars, played golf every Wednesday afternoon.
Right.
In reality, the prospects for somebody like me growing up in Canton, Ohio, if things went really well, I might be able to get a job in a steel mill. Nothing wrong with steel mills, but I sort of intuitively knew, even at that young age, that the work in steel mills, dirty, dangerous, and repetitious.
Right.
And when you balance fancy cars, lots of money, and
right.
fancy cars wins out. And the other aspect of that, I was 8 years old in 1954 when the United States Supreme Court decided Brown versus the Board of Education. I can still visualize myself sitting, reading newspaper articles about Brown, even at that young age. For me, Brown was life-altering. It gave me the hope and the sense that the law was powerful. If it could change an education system, it really was the death knell for segregation in this country. If it could do that, it was powerful. Somehow I understood that at that young age. As I grew and developed, I developed the sense that the law was about justice, about solving problems and helping people. And that's something that's always interested me. It was always on the horizon as I was a football player. And so that transition for me wasn't as challenging, at least wasn't as emotionally challenging. Certainly was challenging going to law school and playing football and raising a family and doing all that. But as you know, if you can get the time management piece down and you're willing to work hard, as your students do, you can do 2 things at once. Actually, you can do 3 or 4 things at once.
Right. So you had some support, but you also had challenges. There were times when you were excused from training camp to go to school. What kind of challenges were the things you faced when you were making that switch, when you were preparing for a life after football?
Well, because I knew what I wanted to do, the challenges were more simply the sort of the normal everyday hurdles and obstacles that get in our way, on a daily basis. I didn't have any sense of insecurity about what the future held. I've always, some would say, had an overdeveloped sense of self. So I didn't suffer from self-doubt, which in retrospect is really pretty helpful. There were days when I wasn't sure that I was going to make it. Indeed, as I am a law school graduate, I'm also a law school dropout. I enrolled at my second year here with the Vikings. I enrolled at William Mitchell College of Law, a night school. Showed up the first day having, prepared, read however many pages of materials. Got to that first class and had no clue what the professor was talking about. And new family, really a new football career. I wasn't committed and wasn't focused and ultimately dropped out. 8 years later, went back to law school, this time at the University of Minnesota, focused and committed. I was curious, I was excited. It was challenging, but it was a lot of fun. Most people don't relish law school. I loved every minute of it.
So Walden has a lot of working professionals as students, people who are thinking about a career change or may already be in the process of a career change. Looking back on the challenges you faced as a dropout and then going back later, what would you have done differently? What advice might you have for somebody looking to make that change?
Well, the key thing for me was understanding, the first time around, I thought I was the dummy in the class. What I didn't understand was everybody else in the class was just as lost as I was. So patience and being committed to the task at hand and not letting the difficulties that pop up, because they pop up for everybody, not letting those difficulties sort of take control.
I see. So you mentioned earlier Brown v. Board of Education. That was a while back. Now you have a middle school named after you. What took place? What happened to move from there to having a middle school named after you?
I don't know. I can't explain that. I can say that it is the most humbling experience I have had. More important than naming the school after me is the students at the school concluded that the person that the school was named after didn't represent who they were, and they wanted to change that. And they took it upon themselves to learn the process for going about making the change, and then work their way through that process. I've had a lot of honors over the years. This is the highest. It is singularly unique.
Really? That's impressive for a Pro Football Hall of Famer and former league MVP to say.
And that is not to denigrate being in the Professional Football Hall of Fame or league MVP. There is just something singularly unique about having a school named after you and having a group of children responsible for that. We talked about how I got to the law, but along the way, I have spent a lot of time in schools and classrooms talking to young people. And we put our athletes on the pedestal. Well, I got put on the pedestal early and was being asked to, talk to young kids about the importance and value of football, but also the importance and value of education.
And you've seen a lot of changes. You mentioned growing up in Canton. It's been said that you were the only person who was involved in the construction of the building of the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
For about 5 minutes one afternoon.
And then inducted into the Hall of Fame. So you've seen a lot of changes in your lifetime. If you look at K-12 education and higher education, what do you think have been the biggest changes?
Well, K-12, the biggest thing is we moved from focusing to some degree on the individual child. And I believe that education works best when we educate children one school, one classroom, one child at a time, and sort of looking at the group. And we've gone to these tests almost for the sake of testing. We've lost sight of what's really important. What are individual children learning? And how do we maximize their ability to learn? How do we put them in the position so that they learn best for themselves?
I see.
Is we've got to get back to I mean, we know what works in education. We just got to start doing it.
So you talk a little bit about students. Walden actually has over 120,000 alumni. Just under half of those are graduates of the Richard W. Riley College of Education and Leadership. So they're education professionals that are in the field. What advice could you give someone who's in a classroom or a principal or someone in a district office? What can they do to improve education?
Well, we have to recognize that educators are some of the most important people we have in this society. We glorify and honor athletes and entertainers, but it's educators who are really preparing our children for the future. And for them, I would say, understanding the difficulties and challenges that young people come from, their backgrounds may not be the best, but if we can work with every child so that we don't lose sight of the fact that, we have to educate the individual. If we can keep hope in them, keep them sort of looking to the future and connecting what they're doing today with that future, I think we can make a lot of progress.
How can society do that? What can we do to elevate these individuals?
I think we simply have to recognize that young people are the future. And that if we are going to have a future that is better than today, we have to prepare them. And we have to recognize their successes. We, for whatever reason, have a tendency to want to drum that individual spirit and energy and all of that out of children. I don't know if we want to do it, but we tend to do that. And I understand that, we have to have order in classrooms. Indeed, without order and process, it simply won't work. But that said, we have to let kids be kids and let them help them understand that what they're doing today has a direct impact on what they will be doing tomorrow. And, when we connect those two, it seems to me that we give kids an incentive on a personal level to work a little harder, to focus a little more.
So Walden has a very diverse student population. Our mission speaks about effecting positive social change, building scholar practitioners who can go out into the community and be transformational. Can you talk about the importance of a diverse student body having access to a quality degree program and why that's critical to society as a whole?
Well, it's critical to society as a whole for a number of reasons, not the least of which is we are soon to be a majority-minority nation. And if we want people to contribute to society, they have to be prepared. If just stop for a minute and think about our criminal justice system. There is a direct correlation between the lack of educational achievement and incarceration rates. So do we want to incarcerate people, or do we want them contributing in positive ways to our society? The other thing is, one of the things I learned really rather starkly being on the court, our court had 7 members. The value of those 7 members was in our differences, because we'd all look at the same problem and have slightly different views on what the solution was or how you got there. And having those 7 views made our decisions better. Having a diverse workforce, having diversity in our community, makes us all better, makes everyone's experience richer. It's sort of like listening to me, my listening to myself. You wouldn't want 7 Allen pages on a court because you lose all those other perspectives. And it's the same throughout society. And that doesn't even get to the idea or the notion that people of color have just as much of a right to succeed or fail as everyone else. We will all be better when we all do better.
Many people have doubted you through your career, and you actually had to sue for the opportunity to serve on the Supreme Court.
I did.
What keeps you going? What makes you tick?
I do know I have a strong sense of who I am and what I think is right, and trying to do what is right, do what is obviously good for me and my family, but for everyone else, making this world a better place, making our communities stronger is something that I've always believed in and have always strived for. Making a contribution so that the world I leave is better than the world I came to.
Very well said. So today, America is more divided than ever.
Than ever, yes.
What can we do to build bridges and to bring about positive social change?
I think the first thing we have to do is start speaking to one another and understanding one another, and understanding that simply because I have one view doesn't mean that somebody else's view is wrong. We have to understand what our differences are, but also what makes us the same, our commonalities. And as best I can tell, the commonalities far outweigh the differences. The fact that I win doesn't have to mean that you lose.
Well said. The Page Education Foundation is now 30 years strong and has provided more than $14 million to help students of color pursue post-secondary education.
Fast approaching 15 million.
Fast approaching 15. Tell us about that journey in growing this foundation from 10 grant recipients the first year to more than 6,700 total, and the impact it's having on people and on communities.
Real people's lives being affected. Our whole goal was to encourage, motivate, and assist young men and women of color pursue education beyond high school. And we did that 2 ways. One, by providing the financial assistance, but 2, and more importantly, requiring our grant recipients, we call them Page Scholars, to work with young children kindergarten through 8th grade, specifically in the area of education, so that those young children can see somebody who looks like them, maybe comes from their neighborhood, has something in common with them, using education as a tool to make their lives better. And now we have these 6,700 plus young men and women who contributed 50 hours of service during their academic years, each year, but who continue to contribute. And we see them and run into them and get to see what they're doing now that, they're 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And they're virtually all of them wonderful contributors to our society. And it's something that if we had plotted it out and thought about it, had a real grasp of what we were getting involved in, this is what we would have hoped we would have accomplished.
It's been an absolute incredible opportunity to hear about your journey and your accomplishments. Before I let you go, do you have one last piece of advice that you would give our new graduates?
I would hope that they would remember that they have something, when you think about it, not many people have, whether it be an undergraduate degree or a master's or a doctorate. with that education, with that degree, comes a certain degree of privilege. And they have the power to use that privilege to change the future in ways that will benefit not only themselves, but the community around them. And if they understand that they have the power to do that, it can be pretty impressive.
Justice Page, you've had a lifetime of contributions toward social change and justice. I want to personally thank you for that. It's been a privilege to speak with you here today and an absolute honor to have you as part of our Walden community. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.